doubly privileged to introduce your next speaker because he is a Toastmaster, and he brings to us this morning a little bit of a continental flair, because our speaker is a Toastmaster in a club in Barcelona, and one of his passions is Toastmastering. He's a conflictologist. He's worked around the world. He's worked in a myriad of different disciplines, whether it's been in prisons, in hospitals, in education, and at the moment he spends his time sorting out conflicts, doing workshops in corporation. So, as I haven't got much more time, I'm going to introduce you to Tobias Rodriguez.
It's almost impossible to smile on the outside without feeling better on the inside. So as we begin, let's look to our side and feel better inside. Take a moment.
Hello.
Who among us, sitting in a meeting or just at work, has all of a sudden had an urge just to scream at the person in front of us? Keep your hand in the air, and if at that moment you took a deep breath and said, I'm going to be in control. You've done that breath. Once, take a deep breath. Now, keep your hand in the air if you've always managed to keep control. Okay. That means you are in the right place. Welcome to From Bummer to Booster, the workshop that gives you tools to solve conflicts and build relationships. Now let me say that again, tools. I'm not going to give you new knowledge, content. Some of the things are new for you, that's cool. But that's not my main goal. My goal is to grab the knowledge that we already have and turn that into tools we can use in everyday conflict. That we can use to build the relationships we have. And I call them the 3 P's of conflict management. Does everyone have a handout?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to focus on P number 1. And you'll notice that in that column there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is your activity for the next 90 seconds. Work in pairs and write down the first 4 words that pop into your head when you hear the word conflict. First 4 words, 90 seconds.
How are you doing?
Can you sit down? Sure. Because we've started the workshop. As quick as you can. We're sorry. If you take one of those, don't open them. What time is it on?
Sorry, not going to review. Hello. I'm blocking through here. Hello. If you got an envelope or something. Thanks very much. Thank you.
years ago, as I was volunteering in a hospital for almost a year, I met a woman called Anna. And every day that I walked into the women's ward, Anna would be standing in the corner in her long pink robe and her puffy slippers. She had long blonde hair and gray eyes and a sad face. She was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And my relationship with Anna was special because with the other patients, I'd walk in and we'd talk, and most of the time I'd just sit and listen. Sometimes we'd watch TV. But with Anna, it was different. I'd walk into the room, our eyes would cross, and then something would happen, and we never spoke. And this went on for almost a year, until one day, it all changed. I'll tell you the rest of the story, but let's get back to our P's. The first P of conflict resolution is positivity. John, what is necessary to make coffee?
Water.
Water. Coffee. Tea. We sometimes sugar. Thank you, Dorothy. A cup. But the gentleman there, your name, sir?
Albert.
Albert. Nailed it right before I had the chance. We sometimes take for granted the source of energy we need to do things. We think of the cup, of the sugar, of the coffee, of the water, and we forget the energy. The first P of conflict management, of conflict resolution, of building relationships is the energy source. If you do not have energy, you cannot deal, solve, build. We've all heard about the power of positive thinking. Again, I'm not going to give you content. I'm going to give you a tool. How do we make the ideal of thinking positively a practical, everyday way of thinking? And this is how you do it. Everything that crosses your mind, every idea you have, every belief you hold can be of one of two types, and it can't be both at the same time. Let me say that again. It can be one of two types, and it can't be both at the same time. I call them bummers and boosters. So whatever crosses your mind, whatever you think, before you engage, either gives you energy and the ability and the will to deal with the situation, or it removes that energy from you and kills all the will to deal with the situation. Less talking and more practice. The gentleman here in the front. Eddie, could you mind sharing your 4 words with us? Okay.
Argument, resistance, and anger or hurt.
Argument, resistance, anger, or hurt. Are those bummers or boosters? So we complain the coffee is cold, but we haven't turned on the machine. More volunteers?
Outcome. I had anger, disbelief, questioning, and argument.
Okay.
Mine is fighting, upset, discord, and chaos.
Trouble, aggression, suppression, and an outcome.
An outcome. That one might be a booster. So here's the thing. For some people, one thing can be a booster, and to another, it could be a bummer. It can't be both for you. The gentleman here, go ahead.
Problem, anger, solve,
Okay, problem, anger, solve, and?
point. One.
Okay, why? That's a nice one. We have lots of time to talk about that. You want to share, sir?
Yeah. Resolution, understanding, calm, and why.
Oh. So he should be up here instead of me. Next time, call him. Thank you.
Anger, fight, opinions and disagreement.
So here's your tool, and please write it down. Is this thought a bummer or a booster? What we want to ask ourselves before we engage, and P1, your first tool, is a thinking tool, is to ask yourself, are the thoughts, the idea, the beliefs that I have about myself, oh man, I can't do this. The things I think about someone else, oh, this guy's an idiot. Or the things I think about the situation, we're never going to get out of this. Are my thoughts bummers or boosters? And in the case that they are bummers, we want to change them into boosters. So here's a way of changing our ideas. And sometimes folks feel manipulated when I do this exercise. But I wasn't the one doing the manipulation. It's our language that sets us up for that. See, language has a way of playing tricks on us and pulling the plug before we even start. So when we hear words like conflict, it sets us up for a negative outcome. And we want to change that. So here are my 4 words when I hear conflict. Forces. And I say forces not in the sense of the Return of the Jedi, but in the sense of some kind of living interaction, as opposed to dead, heavy, non-dynamic situations, positions. Conflicts are things that evolve. There's tension, there's continuity, there's growth. And when I say forces, I also purposely avoid the word people, because sometimes we personalize. Remember, the problem is the problem, the person is not the problem. And when we make the person the problem, that sentence is not mine, it's from Michael White, father of the narrative therapy and mediation. When we make the person the problem, what happens? Coralie, do you have a hard time changing yourself? Possibly. Now imagine the task of changing someone else. Good luck. So the problem is the problem. We want to make the conflict something besides the person. Second, or the last word, incompatible. I love the language of compatibility. It's the language of the future. Since the world has blown up and now we get people coming from all over the places, what used to be right and wrong, good or bad, is no longer as clear to everyone. There are many ways of doing the same thing. And when we get into conflict, if we pull the flag of right or wrong, good or bad, we'll have a hard time understanding each other. The language of compatibility is different. It's like the language of computers. Does this device work with that device? And if it does, great. If it doesn't, great. Remember, a conflict with no solution is a solved conflict. I love it. A conflict with no solution is a solved conflict. If I decided right now to jump out the window and fly, do I have a possibility of doing that? No, I don't. That is solved. And another way, for instance, my grandfather was and is my role model. We connected, I was at a very young age, I was 13, he died at 89. And obviously when he died, that was clearly a bummer for me. And a situation that had no solution. And when I think of my grandfather, it inspires some sadness some willingness to change the reality because I miss him. And now I use the example of death because it's an ultimate example where there's no buts and ands. So I do the change from a bummer to a booster. How does that happen? The sadness, where does the sadness come from? Because I miss him. It comes from an interaction that we had, from something that was uplifting, from something that made me be the person who I am today. So when I think of my grandfather, even though I feel sadness, at the same time, I feel pride. I feel and hold that sadness as a flag of who he was and what he meant to me, and of all the things he did to get me where I am now. You see, sometimes we want to choose the outcome of conflict, and that's not how this world works. Maybe when they figure out how we will live on Mars, we will be able to choose, before starting, the outcomes of our conflicts. In this world, it's not like that. So the language of compatibility opens your mind and your heart to deal with the situation without a pre-imposed idea. And some conflicts sometimes simply don't have a solution now. So when a conflict doesn't have a solution for you now, that means it's a solved conflict.
Now let's ignore it.
Embrace it. Those who are parents probably understand perfectly what I'm saying. Questions about P number 1, positivity. And then the last word that was on the screen, that seem incompatible. Conflicts are like a game. And though you think this is absolutely unacceptable, that's the definition I want to put into your brain. This is going to be like a game. Someone might win, someone might lose, you might both win, it might be a tie. It's about figuring out these forces, not people, if we can manage some kind of compatibility. And if not, that's just the way our world is. Why do I choose this definition? And you might say he's being a romantic. Because it is the thoughts that I have about what I'm going to do, what makes me feel in a certain way. And the way I feel changes the way I interact. And that changes the outcome. There's an awesome video on YouTube. Who has seen the video about the basketballs? The two teams, the black team and the white team, and they have a ball. You've seen that, gentlemen? Can you stand up and explain that fast, rapidly to the group?
Yeah, there's a video clip of there's a group of about 4 people dressed in white and 4 people dressed in black. They're passing basketballs around. And the challenge is to watch it and count the number of passes of the white team only. And you focus on that, and you watch it and you count the number, and then the big challenge is, I'll bet you'll get it wrong. No one's ever got this right. So you really focus on it. And then they actually added in material, and then it's played against you after, so just sit back and watch it and do it. Yeah, what else did you see apart from basketballs? There was nothing, just all the basketballs being passed around. And then you watch it again, and actually halfway through, a man in a gorilla suit walks right in the middle of the room, waves at the camera, and walks out the other side. And people just don't see it, because they're focusing on the white basketball players.
Thank you. Your name is?
Gary.
An applause for Gary. Moral of the story. Our brain is selective. We don't get to change that. That's how we're hardwired. And don't touch the hardware. Our brain is selective. We choose some things, we leave other things, and we distort others. The option is to make the choosing and the distorting aware. You get to choose. Since I can't get everything in, then I'll pick what I want to put in. And since I have but to distort some of the things, then I get to choose how I distort them. And this may seem kind of manipulative, but that's the choice you have. If you don't make that choice, your mind, the language, the people around you, the culture will make the choice for you. And the choices they've made for us, we don't like them, otherwise we wouldn't be in this workshop. So pick your thoughts, pick your ideas. Choose the part of reality that will give you the energy, that will give you the power to face the conflict. Is there any question, or shall we move on to P2? P2, volunteer. A brave warrior. Thomas, right?
Bob.
Bob. Close. It looks like a Thomas. So while he's preparing, what we're going to have now is P number 2, which is proactivity. The proactive power of body language. Our bodies are great tools to get a head start in the way conflicts have an outcome. So if P1 is a thinking tool before we interact, P2 is a performing tool as we are just about to interact. He's going to do some gestures on the chair there, and we're all body language experts, and we're going to give him feedback on how that makes us feel. While he's preparing, let me warm you up. What do you get when I do this? Okay, something dear to us: love, patriotism, truth, transparency. Good, you guys are good at this. How about if I do this? All right, confusion. This one. Expectation. It could be greed. It could be right before the game. You know, you're willing to see that game. And this one, before we get Bob on, one of my favorites. This is a very common position we use in social interactions.
Big lead.
Does it give up the right image? When we cover our body, the central part of our bodies, which is the most vulnerable parts, that means we're feeling vulnerable. So if you want to come across as sociable, as open, as friendly, we're going to open your body. Well, let's have Bob. Okay, let's give us number 1, or the 5 there.
Pensive.
Thoughtful, pensive. So if you're having a conversation with someone that might or might not be a conflict or a difficult conversation, and the person starts going like this, what do? Do you continue speaking? Do you speed up? Do you keep throwing information at the person? Slow down. Ask them a question. Did I make sense? Do you want me to repeat that?
Yes, please.
Here we have the next one. Sometimes our brain snaps and we kind of look inside and we disconnect from the reality. If that happens, it might be that you're actually being boring, or it just might be that your brain snapped. What do we want to do? Bring them back, take a pause, wait for the person to come back. Great.
Tired. Exasperation.
So when we rub our noses, what that might be? There you go. Thank you, Eileen. And this reminds me of 2 important rules of body language. She said, telling lies. So, do you know the saying, that something smells fishy? That's where it comes from. Body language, there are a couple of rules. The first rule is, we might not agree on what smells wonderful, but we'll all be in agreement at what stinks. So we want to give out the right smell, and then when we receive information from other people, we want Not to assume, but to ask. This is important. Just because I'm rubbing my nose, it doesn't mean I'm lying. It might be that I am lying and it's itching at the same time. So, with other people, don't assume. Ask. Be curious inside. Maybe this person is having a hard time explaining. Maybe they don't like what I'm saying. That's why they're touching their nose. Maybe they're insecure. But don't assume. When you're performing, use what you know gives out a good smell to your advantage. When someone covers their mouth hard, that might be that they have something to say and they're holding it back. And as you guys said perfectly, when we rub our eyes, that might be we're tired or we don't want to see. And this, when you're in tough, difficult conflict situations, you'll notice this gesture. It's typical. Babies do it. They cover their eyes when they don't want to see things.
Not interesting.
Sometimes we're having conversations, and at work this happens, especially with managers, and their feet, their bodies are facing a completely different direction. Maybe the computer, maybe what they were doing, and then they just turn their head to the person. This means we're not interested. If you like observing peoples in cafes, especially couples, when one is ready to go, their body will slightly turn towards the direction of the door, even though they keep their head faced the other way. So let's get it back towards us, facing the person if you're having a conversation. And then defiant.
Not convinced.
I don't want to know what it is.
From this side here, what do you guys get from this? No interest. And this is the position we most love. It's comfortable to cross our arms. It's nice to sit back. We like to cross our legs. But you just told me what this says. So if you are in a conversation, especially if you're feeling defensive, you want to make an active exercise of undoing this position. So let's undo it for a while. Put his feet there, and your hands are great. One more.
More boredom. Superior.
In conflict resolution, in relationship building, we listen with our ears. Right or wrong? With our eyes. Observation. Keep your eyes on the ball. If we had time, we would do this exercise where two people go together. None of them speak. I bring you back to a time in your childhood, and the person, just by observing your face, gets to guess more or less your age, if you enjoyed school, if you just by observation. So keep your eyes on the ball at all times, at the other person.
Can I just jump? I have a member or employee who constantly will not look at you when you talk to her. Her eyes just wanders. How do you, and it's very distracting for the person who talks to her. How do you make that person be aware of that situation and try to bring them back?
Okay. Number one, that person might have a very hard time looking at you. It might be a shy person. It might be a person with some doubts and insecurities, and the fact that you look the person in the eye creates that reaction. Two, there's a talking tool that we're going to look at, which is P3. And you can use that to talk to the person. The last one, what do you get from that? So what?
Give up.
If you do this, it's so what? But if you do this, or that, it's transparency. Remember that. Okay? If I say I love you and there's no other way we can do this, it's different than saying I love you and there's no other way we can do this. We're going to have to let you go. We're going to have to let you go. Do you the difference? Show your hands. This is the proactive power of your body. So here's your tool. Does my body say friend or foe? That's your question, that's your tool. Put it in the second column. Does my body say friend or foe? And notice these tools are simple so that you can use them, so that you can remember them. You're having a conversation, things are starting to heat up. Ask yourself, does my body say friend or foe? And speaking of friends, a big applause for Bob. So P1, thinking tool. P2, performing tool. P3 is a talking tool. P3 is to be practical. It's a beaver that's practically fighting his way through. As Toastmasters, everyone in the room a Toastmaster? So we're the guys from public speaking, communication, leadership, right? Yeah. So every time we get into a conflict, we always find the right words, correct? And when we find the right words, they come out perfectly, right? Here's your tool. This tool will help you say the right things in the right ways. It's called DAN. It's DAN because D stands for describe, A stands for assert, and N stands for name. Describe the situation, and notice it's the situation. It's something specific, factual. You can put your